We've all been there, just enjoying our afternoon, and then BAM! You remember, you've got 50 Poxwalkers sat in a box. You try to forget them, you try to move on, but you were always on my mind. You were always on my mind. Come on, let's go paint some miniatures. Hello and welcome to Broadsword Wargaming. My name's Ollie, and in this video I am going to attempt to paint 50 Poxwalkers in less than 10 hours. If you're new to the channel, please do make sure you like, share, subscribe and hit the alarm bell for more videos to come. Check out all the links below if you want to support the channel in any other way. There's links to Patreon and places to buy your own Poxwalker swarm. So the premise of this video, 50 Poxwalkers, 10 hours. For any of you who have followed the channel at all, you'll know I have a penchant for self-punishing and doing 24-hour challenges. Well, I failed not one, this was the Indomitus box set, no, not two, this was a bolt action 1000 point challenge, which I nearly completed, and I also did a third 24-hour challenge where I tried to paint 2000 points of Space Marines. How mental. Well, I failed them all, so taking some advice from Liam at Phoenix Miniature Art, a friend of mine, he did the Harlequins in the commission video a while ago. He actually watched those videos and messaged me afterwards and said, there are so many things you could be doing that would help improve the speed of your painting. So he's going to give us some tips throughout this video. Do check his channel out. He has a YouTube channel and a Twitch as well. Streams a lot and is a really, really good painter. So let's see what tips he can give us throughout this video.
Set your standard and live with it. You need to have a clear goal on what good looks like and when to stop. It's far too easy just to keep adjusting details and that army will never get finished. Paint a test model. Test models are great because they give you a really good indication of what that model is going to look like in the end, and also how difficult the process is and how you can make that process of painting more efficient.
Taking Liam's advice, I did just that. These are 3 models I used as test pieces. The end result was a bit different, but it was close enough. To do this, I'm using my airbrush. This was given to me by the guys at the Airbrush company. It's the Sparmax, a really nice airbrush on a 0.4 needle. Having based everything black, I moved on to some white paints. This paint is so very thin. Now you could do this with a spray can. I live out in Ireland now and there were no spray cans available, which I would have done actually to try it. Here I'm trying to be really, really precise as the colors are all going to depend on the light and shadow, and that's what's going to sell this scheme. It's all about lights, shadows and placement. As you can see, the extremes are quite extreme. It is black underneath and white at the top. There's very little grey as an in-between colour on this swarm of models. This probably took me about 40 minutes with the airbrush. The next step is using the Dead Flesh by Game Air Vallejo. This is a light green. Now, this is again super thin because I do not want this to change the colours of the black underneath. I want the blacks to stay very dark. So it's so thin that it doesn't really change the colour of the model. It just paints over the white. And I am still painting mostly from above here. I'm not really spraying up underneath the model. These were all done with one coat. Not that strong, not that effective. Stood up next to the test model, the tones will change significantly. Now, as I said, the test model does actually end up changing ever so slightly, which I know is against Liam's advice there, but I found when doing 50 was a little bit different to doing 3. I go with a second coat of the Dead Flesh. I end up using 3 coats, I think, at the end until I'm happy. It doesn't matter if they're all exactly the same because Poxwalkers in their nature are not exactly the same. They're all different bodies, different colors, and those different shades will show through later on anyway, which is quite nice. Here you can see an undercoated one coat, 2 coat, and 3 coats. I know the 2 and 3 look pretty similar. That's probably just because of the strong daylight behind them. Blast through all these, and this was around another 40 odd minutes. It doesn't need to be too precise at this point because we are going to go back and clean up just the lights and shadows in the next step. It takes a while, it's a bit boring, but it's quite a fun process in the sense that you feel like you've achieved a lot once it's all done, which is important for your state of mind. 3 colors of the Dead Flesh over 50 models. Up to this point, about an hour and a half. So really happy with that progress. I'm not sure if I'm behind where I wanted to be. Going underneath the models now to reinforce some of that shadow, I'm using the black surface primer. Any black would do. It looks nice, but I wanted a bit more definition underneath the belly on this model, underneath the man boobs on this one as well, and underneath the arms and in the elbow and the shoulders. Do look at your models. Again, you could do this with a paintbrush. You don't need an airbrush, but this is allowing me to be very accurate and is also letting me get some nice blends in at the same time. So it's a very thin black, just to try and reinforce the light to shadow on these models. That stage didn't take very long at all. Not all models needed it. And now back to Liam for more tips.
It's really important to make your army really striking on the tabletop. You want people to look at it and think that looks fantastic. The reality is if you can pull that off and you can draw people's eye into the right place, then they're not really going to be looking at the details of the model.
Using the Druchii Violet to spray all of the tentacles. This part was without a doubt my favorite part of the whole video and the process. It's the time when some nice colors get added to the models and the purple and green contrast together really, really nicely. This is quite easy to do as well. You're just airbrushing on any of the areas. It doesn't matter about overspill. Try and be relatively accurate, but the overspill just helps blend the model together anyway and doesn't make the tentacles look quite so separated. The color difference between the light green and the purple is just lovely to look at. I was tempted to leave them at this kind of color scheme, but I did want some bit more variation on the bodies themselves. So I started to use the Celia green shade. And for this, I wasn't quite sure initially what I wanted to do with it, but it's a bit stronger and far more like a contrasting strong green than the one I've been using. Putting this on any of the mutated hands, the sort of clumpy bits there on that guy on the left-hand side and the one on the right, any sort of weird elongated limbs as well, it just seemed like a nice way to separate the model without making it look too different. The rest of the next process is done using various shades and colors. Now, these are completely down to you what you want to do and how much you want to do this, but pick random patches on models. Do still think about the light. We want the model's face to be the main part of these models because that's where we want people to look. So I'm spraying random patches of Reikland flesh, random patches of Agrax, and the other greens as well, the Chthonian, just to try and make some more variation in the skin tones. As you can see now, they don't look quite as stark and quite as bright. We will also add to this in a minute to really pull the flesh together. But having these undertones and these layers of different variable paint colors is really, really handy in helping this army come together. We'll do a bit of dry brushing. Dry brushing gets a lot of bad stick for being useless. I'm using a makeup brush. It's softer, it doesn't have as hard ridges, so get a tiny bit of this on the makeup brush. You don't need much, really wipe it into some paper. And the difference with using this is it's going to be a softer finish. And I don't want hard edges. Sure, they're fine for Space Marine armor and other things, but for faces and flesh, it wants to be almost a subtle blend. I could have done this with an airbrush, possibly, but I wanted to pick out some of the ridges and the edges that I'd missed that didn't look quite as stark and contrasty. So I'm focusing on the face, the chest, and the arms, just to help bring those out, especially where I've blended some of the model. Like that one in the middle, he's got more flesh tone blends on him. This now lets you see those details a bit more clearly. Another useful tool to have in the armory is the Skeleton Horde contrast paint. Now the bones, the tentacles, and the flesh are the main things on all of these models. So it makes sense that you want all of these bits to look good. And I do think this does a good job, especially over the lighter green airbrush colors we've got so far. It leaves the depths nice and dark and does give us a lovely finish on the top. Focusing on these areas, we get the bones done, and I think it contrasts really nicely with the rest of the model. The next part, I'm not going to lie, is the most boring part and the dullest part of batch painting, and that is essentially the painting. Using all kinds of colors, I ended up using darker colors to paint the clothes, the weapons, the guns, any of the other elements on the models, because on the test model, I did do a lighter one with a white coat, but it didn't really contrast very well with the flesh tones we'd worked up so far. So sticking to the darker weapons did seem to work better. So I used Dryad bark on all of the wood, the gun handles, the mallets, and this bit just takes time. That's it, there's nothing more to it. It is boring, and that is something you need to look past and try and find some other things to do to keep yourself entertained whilst doing this process. Once these elements start coming in, the models start to look even better now because it's breaking up the rest of the skin tones and the other elements you've worked on. Whilst I'm painting in all these details, we'll pop over to Liam to let him explain how to batch paint better.
Paint sections of every model at the same time when you're batch painting and paint them in the same order. The reason for this is you very quickly build up muscle memory, and it also makes it faster.
On we go. I found a useful thing to do whilst painting endless models is to distract yourself with something. Put Netflix on your phone or some other music you like or a podcast. I'm actually talking to my brother here whilst he's painting his Necrons. And hobby time is really, really useful to do with someone else, as it takes your mind off what you're doing and lets your body take over until something like this happens. Non-oil spillage, of course. I think I did this in the last video as well, so maybe I need to look at something to fix this. People have told me getting little stands and things are good. It's actually down to poor placement. I've got my painting palette on the right hand side and I had the non-oil open in between the palette and the models. It's late, I was probably being a bit lazy, but getting a pipette or a syringe like this does manage to save most of the pot. I'm not gonna lie, I didn't get it on camera, but I also spilt the green paint behind it. Both within the same time, probably because it's late, probably because I'm tired. Yeah, that happens to us all and it's not great for a speed painting video. It was whilst I was painting this flesh with the Athonian camo shade that I spilt it. Here I have got the paint slightly watered down and I'm painting it over all of the flesh. It really helps blend those purples and the browns we did earlier with the airbrush and blends the whole model together. Do try to avoid it pooling. Don't let it pool all over the model. You don't want to just destroy all the work you've done so far. So keep it thin, keep it light, and keep it on there. Then you can use your washes once you've dried that off. Use the washes on the trousers and the weapons just to help darken all those things down and leave you with the nice light top.
There's a really important tool that you really need to have if you're thinking about speed painting armies, and that is a hairdryer. I know it seems really silly, but if I've got a huge amount of models to paint, if I'm batch painting, I will have a hairdryer on my lap.
I totally agree. The hairdryer lets me dry off all those washes and move on to the next stage quicker, which makes me paint more efficiently, and that is the whole point. Now I know we've already used this and we've already dry brushed, but we're going to go in again now the whole model has been washed. We have the bone you can highlight with this. This will highlight the flesh and really bring out those details because we're not doing much more to the whole model from now on. A handy tip and something you might find useful is do use a thicker brush for the larger areas when you're painting a colour. So there's a lot of leather on these and the leather tends to have pouches and gun holsters. Paint them with the bigger brush, then use the detail brush for the smaller parts to avoid making mistakes, if you can.
Doesn't matter how good you are, everyone makes mistakes and it's really important to understand how to manage them. When it comes to fixing mistakes, never correct them until the end and then have a stage once the army is all finished to go over each model individually and quickly correct those tiny mistakes.
We are about 9 hours in. We are looking like we're gonna get there. The models have been painted. I've done some small highlights over the leather with the lighter colors, the same with most of the grays and everything else. Things are starting to come together. Can we get this done in 10 hours? I think so. Next up is a really easy step, and I like the contrast paint for this because it's a bit thinner, but we want to paint the base rims. So dunk it in straight out of the pot and just go around the trims. The issue I have with things like Abaddon Black is it goes a little bit lumpy sometimes, or it can be too thick. So I like a thin base rim because I hate seeing streaks on the base rims of my models. Finally, it's a stage I know you've all been waiting for. It's how you create the Nurgle goop. Now there is a Nurgle technical paint, I don't have it, but I thought this would do just the same thing. This is entirely down to personal choice, but I really like it. I painted this onto all of the lumps and the boils and some of the little bobbly bits around hands and other parts of the bodies because I wanted something to stand out on these models. With the purple and the greys and everything quite muted, these really do stand out at the end and did make a massive difference. And I wasn't sure, this wasn't part of the plan, but I did it anyway and I'm so glad I did. You can of course go in with reds and purples and pinks if you like, but that's how they looked at the end. They look more toxic, they look more necrotic, and that's what we're after with these Poxwalkers. Almost there. One final part to help unify everything is finish the bases. You want something cheap, quick and effective, and this is the best thing I could see alongside the Geek Gaming basing products. I used soil with a bit of brown grout. This will set rock hard, dead solid and won't move at all. It allows you to use the grout as a pigment to get some mud up the legs of the models as well. Again, drawing the focus towards the face and the glowing spots rather than the feet, because you don't want to be looking at the feet of these models, you want to be looking at the faces and the points you've painted to stand out. Dunk, dip, dodge, dive, and done. You could of course leave them here as finished, but being the perfectionist I am and ever pushing for things to be better, I am going to use some tufts. I got these, the Geek Gaming tufts. I think these are their spring or summer grass 10mm tufts. Peel them off, push them down, stick them on, they're already glued and they are finished. And they will add a little bit more to the models. They can also use to cover up any mistakes you may have made and also help bring more to the ground cover. And that is the models done. It took me just under 10 hours to paint 50 to this standard. There are only two other things I'd like to do. One would be to varnish these models to knock back some of that shine, and the other thing would be to paint the eyes yellow. Unfortunately, I don't have the paint I want, so I'm still waiting on that, but you will see an update of these on the channel at some point. And that's it. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you have, please remember to like, share, and subscribe, and hit the alarm bell for more videos to come. Check out the links below, check out the Patreon, because thank you guys for all of your support. Now remember, go out there, get batching, get painting, and paint smarter.